Hey everyone, welcome back to episode 4 of Tarry On. And maybe not welcome back, maybe welcome for the first time, because maybe you're wild and you just jumped right in here to episode 4 without even listening to the first 3. I don't want to assume that everybody on here is a rule follower. So welcome back. Really happy to be here. We have a lot to talk about as always. Okay, fine. I have a lot to talk about as always. But I am really excited to talk about what I want to talk about today, which is God's faithfulness in the midst of transitions and in the midst of waiting, which I finally really read the definition of the word tarry. I launched an entire little baby podcast with the name Tarry in the title and tried to explain it multiple times, and I finally just sat down for a minute and was like, okay, I think I know what it means, but what am I doing? And I will tell you, it fits perfectly for today what we want to talk about. But when I read the official definition, it is to delay in acting or doing, to linger in expectation, and to abide or stay in a place. And that's really what I want to cover today. The idea of lingering in expectation is, that is exactly what this podcast is, right? There's the reality of waiting, the reality of delays, but with the hope and expectation that things will be good, things will happen. So anyway, that's what we're going to talk about later. What I want to talk about now is I did something new this weekend. So I have to volunteer for youth cheer and football because a couple of our kids are cheering. And I looked through the list of job opportunities on the Sign Up Genius, and it was do the 50-50 raffle, which I'm I can do. I can walk around with raffle tickets and try to get people to buy them. But it's not really, I'm fine at it. But you know who's awesome at it? My husband is awesome at it. He can get you to buy a lot of tickets. So I skipped that one. And then there was the concession stand, and I was okay, I loved playing store as a kid and restaurant and stuff like that. So obviously that is appealing to me. And then it got even more appealing because it was the fry wagon, and I'm oh my gosh, just give me any kind of potato, and I'm very happy about that. But then I thought that's probably a problem. I probably shouldn't step foot in the fry wagon. And then I landed on what I thought, oh my gosh, this is perfect. And I immediately signed up all 3 slots for 3 different games to be the booth announcer for the football game. I thought, I have podcasts. I've recorded 3 episodes. So I'm basically an expert at talking into a microphone, and I like football. I'm into it. So how hard can this be? And so I sign up, and I just have a moment of clarity. I'm I probably actually need to know technical terms. So I reach out and I'm hey, just wanted to check, to be the announcer, do I need technical knowledge? And they're no, it's super simple. I'm nah, I don't know about that. So I took it upon myself to go shadow the person before me. And you're talking about youth football, right? So these are just little people with little jerseys with numbers that my old lady eyes can't see from the booth. And they're moving at a pace that's pretty quick, right? They're little kids hopped up on sugar probably before the game. And they all kind of bunch up. And although I'll say for the age level I was announcing for, it was a little better, right? It's maybe 4th grade, 5th grade. But still, their jerseys were all crumpled in the back. I couldn't tell if it was a 46, 48. What are we working with here? You know what I mean? And anyway, my job was to say things hold on, now I have to think about what I'm doing. That they gained 6 yards on the play with a quarterback keeper by number so-and-so. And anyway, and then update on the downs. You get it. People listening to this who listen to commentator footballers, you're cringing right now. You're Mitty, you didn't even get the example right. And I hear you, and I say, I know. And so anyway, so I do this announcer job, and I'm in the booth, and I crush it, right? The first thing, I crush the first one, right? Because I say something I don't know what I said. Guys, I blacked out, but my face was hot. You know what I mean? I was just it was a lot because people kept turning around looking up at the booth like, why is this person on the microphone? Anyway, I feel like I think I either provided a lot of entertainment for people and they left happier, or people who take things too seriously in life, which is 84% of Americans, left annoyed that they ever allowed me up in the booth, because there were a few times. So at one point when it was like a turnover on downs, see, I learned that yesterday. I thought that we got the first down because they flipped that little card to 1, but I missed the ref's hand pointing the opposite direction, that, oh no, that's actually the other team has it now because we didn't hit the mark and we didn't get a first down. And if you hate sports, I'm sorry, this is almost over, but the point is, I made an announcement that was like, so and so, got several yards, and that's a first down. And I said it like that, like really happy. And I heard one person clap, probably like, another misinformed person on football, because anybody watching the game, they all clearly knew that that was false information. And I know this because people whipped their heads around and looked at me. And one of my friends mouthed like, no. So I had to get back on the microphone. And I didn't know what I was going to say at this point, right? And I was like, this is what came. My bad. Actually, it's not our ball. It's the other team's. Sorry about that, everybody. And that, while it doesn't sound like a big deal on here, just like live in a stadium and you can hear yourself echoing, it was just like, oh my gosh, right? And then some other, calls I made were I couldn't see who tackled the players. So I was like, number 11 ran the ball for 4 yards and was tackled by someone on the other team. And that was an actual announcement I made, guys. So I don't know. I will update you the next time, the next episode after I volunteer, to let you know if I did just get moved to like the fry wagon, or if I'm allowed to do announcements again. When I left, somebody was like, I forget, but it was one of those compliments you get that was either like, well, you know what? She had a great time. And you're like, oh, yeah, well, maybe it wasn't as good as I thought. Anyway, I'm married to an eternal optimist and a motivational speaker. And so he just thought it was the best thing ever. But I don't know. Can you really take his word for it? Because his entire job is to make you to believe everything is the best thing ever. But it's fine. I took it. And I think I'm going to go do it again because, I don't know. It was kind of fun. It was kind of fun. But now we're watching football today, and I'm really listening to the commentators, and I'm picking up some good football lingo. But anyway, okay, so here we are. And just want to, as think about a lot of stuff this week. Life is wild sometimes. And I remember when I was single parenting and people would kind of check in and be like, hey, how's life? And I'm like, honestly, if you just even asked me how's today, I would have 4 different stories for you, because that's how wild my life was, right? So much was happening. It seemed like every single day. And so I just like longed for boring. I'm like, when will I ever get to just say like, oh, nothing's new. Nope, just the same old, same old. I just kept thinking about that. Like, I would love to answer. Like, nothing's new. But then I realized there are people who would rather have my answer, right? They're bored of well, nothing's new. Like, and they really wish something was new. And so I understood that I didn't want to like despise the stage of life I was in, or even just the way my life was going, because really, I feel like when we moved to Mexico back in 2012, so when I was married the first time, we became missionaries and went to Mexico City to help girls rescued from human trafficking. And that decision was like a really big decision. And I felt like a lot of that weight landed on my shoulders. It was work I wanted to do. It was work I really cared about. And I felt like that decision rested on my shoulders. So we sold everything we owned, including our house. We moved to Mexico with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. And had about, I think we ended up somehow getting like 30 bags of luggage down there, and that was all we owned to our name. And anyway, that was like, when I look back over my adult life, I felt like that was the beginning of the end, but also the beginning of living life very differently, because up until that point, everything just worked out the way I wanted it to. I said in the last episode how we whipped out our old yearbooks a couple weekends ago. And in that yearbook, it was my senior yearbook, and you do a write-up, right? You say like what you want for your future, and I had put in there like, I want to marry an awesome guy, have some kids, do this, but whatever I wrote in there was like exactly how my life was. Like everything up until the point of really moving to Mexico was like everything I wanted. I had children, I was married, I owned a home, I had a job, like everything that I had wanted to do, I had gotten to do. And we moved to Mexico, and I knew it would be hard. I just didn't realize how hard it would be. Like I've only moved towns. I didn't move even a state away, but this was an entire country, right? That I'm changing, and language and culture and all of it. And I was ill prepared for how difficult that season was going to be. And while that season was difficult, I don't believe just like a difficult season is what ends a marriage, right? Like, I don't think that. I think probably a difficult season that ends a marriage is just an indication that there was already a lot falling apart before that moment. And so that's really what it was for us. But I look back at that time, after everything kind of fell apart and I ended up divorced and a single parent, and I really spent many years looking back at the time where we decided to move to Mexico, and I wondered, did I do the wrong thing? Like, is this my fault? Like, was moving to Mexico the wrong thing? And that was what caused my whole life to kind of unravel. And I spent a lot of years dwelling on that, more years than I should have, dwelling on that question. And ever since then, my life has been like a series of transitions. There's just never been a time where I'm ever going to answer anybody, no, nothing's new. And honestly, I say this now, but oh goodness, I hope I don't regret it. But honestly, I like my life this way. Because even if all my circumstances are kind of like stabilized, I hope that I'm always learning and growing. I hope that I'm always seeing miracles, right? Like, I hope that I'm looking for the silver linings and the ways that I can be grateful for things. And I hope I keep hearing God's voice in the big ways and the small ways. So I do hope my answer is always like, yo, let me tell you what's up. But then there are other times where it's a lot that's going on, right? There's a lot of transition, a lot of things changing, and it can be really hard to, well, tarry on in the middle of that, right? Like, how do you wait well with expectation without feeling discouraged or without getting impatient? And I just think about my life in the last 10-ish years, and I think about how there's been so many things that have been these big transitions, whether that's been job changes, getting remarried, houses, like all of those things have been huge transitions for me. And I don't know that anybody thrives when there's like a lot of transition with loss mixed in with that. Like, I don't know that anybody thrives on that, but I do think it's possible to. I do think we can. And that's like what this podcast is really dedicated to. And so this last week, I've been very introspective because it looks like there's another transition on the horizon for us. And these transitions always involve money. They involve like our work and like what we feel like called and led to do. And so it looks like there's another one on the horizon. And it is like a mixed bag of emotions. And so as I'm like processing, okay, here we go. We're on the cusp of like an unknown. I don't know what's next. I know what's not next, right? I know the door that needs to close, but I don't yet know the door that's opening, and that freaks me out. I was thinking about like, how do we stay grounded and how do we stay hopeful in the midst of that? Like, I don't have a lot of answers. And I remember one time I got together with I call her a friend of mine, and she's like in her 80s, and we got together for breakfast, and I kind of just told her how everything was really falling apart, and she had this big smile on her face, and I was like, can she not hear me? Like, I mean, we were in a Panera, and I thought maybe it was like a little loud, but I'm like, why is she smiling? I'm literally telling her everything's falling apart. And she just was like, all right, well, when you have run out of all your good ideas, this is where God gets to shine with his good ideas. And I was like, well, aren't you something? Like, isn't that easy for you to say? It's not like necessarily easy to hear that. But I guess after 80 plus years of living and you've seen it over and over again, I guess you can say that with confidence. And while I'm only half her age, I feel like there's been all these smaller things that keep kind of preparing, right, for the next big transition that's going to happen. Because guess what? I think I have good news and bad news, because I actually think it's good news that our life never stays the same. You know, seasons change. It is good, but it's also bad news, right? Like, there's just never a time where you get to just sit back in the lazy boy recliner of life and put your feet up and go, okay, cool, done. And like, nothing else is going to be different. And this is why I love the story in 1 Kings 17, like a reference to the Old Testament, which I love. And when I met Gio and he asked me on our first date, hey, what are things you're into? Like, what do you just love? What are the top 3 things you love talking about? That was his actual question. And now I know him, and he does lists all the time. If I'm talking to him, he always is like, well, I have 2 things to say. Well, there's 3 things, actually. Even when we got married, his vows, I'm not joking, were a list. He had 3 bullet points, which each had a sub-bullet point. So anyway, it's so adorable. But on our first date, he asked, what are the top 3 things you like to talk about? And I thought, and I really, like, I was into him. So I'm like, well, I hope he likes me. But at this point, I was like, I'd rather him like me for who I am and not for like the pretend version of me. So I was like, well, I like to talk about personalities. That's 1. 2, childhood wounds, like that's a big one for me. I love to dabble and I thought those 2 would be more palatable then. And I was like, in 3, I just love the Old Testament, and I really would like to talk about 1 Kings 17 with you. That's Hey, Mandy is so much fun on a first date. So anyway, I say that and his eyes light up and he loves the Old Testament too. And you know what? That's kind of when I knew. I'm like, that's it right there. But I always would joke around like, yo, I'll know I've met my husband when I say I want to talk about 1 Kings 17 and his eyes light up. Like, seriously, I would say that. So anyway, the paraphrase of 1 Kings 17 is basically the prophet Elijah. There's a famine and a drought coming to the area. And so he tells people, hey, there's a famine and drought that's going to come. There's not going to be rain here for a long time. There's not going to be a lot of food. And so God tells him, like, hey, go sit by this brook, drink the water from the brook, and I will bring you bread and meat. And so he does that. And then the next passage, so I'm reading this story just one day casually, I guess. And the next passage is, and then the brook dries up. At some point, the brook dries up. Again, clearly I'm paraphrasing everything on this podcast, but the brook dried up. And I remember having an actual out loud reaction that was like, I'm sorry, what? The brook is dry? God, didn't you tell him to go to that brook? And now you're going to let it dry up? That feels really mean and like you tricked him. And then you keep reading and he gets another directive, though, when the brook dries up. And it's like, go to this widow's house and ask her for bread and something to drink. And the widow was like, hey, I'm going to run out of oil and flour. Like, we have none. And if you take what I have, like, my son and I are going to starve to death. We're like trying to ration it. And he was like, no, just trust me. Just make the bread, get me the drink. And I promise you, your oil and your flour will not run out. And so she did. And so it was, right? She had enough oil and flour, more than she believed she would have. And then that scenario ends. And then it's sometime later. This widow's son is very sick and is about to die. And so Elijah comes in and he prays 3 times. And the boy comes back to life. And she says at the end, now I know that you truly are like a man of God and what you say is true. Like, she saw it with her own eyes. And I share that story to say, like, I've been fascinated with it for years and I don't know what draws me to it. Because even as I'm saying it now, I'm like, maybe some of you have tuned out at this point because it might not sound that fascinating. But for me, I just remember the feeling of shock when I read, like, well, the brook dried up. And I was like, wait a second, you sent him to the brook. Because I think I believed for such a long time that if you're where you're supposed to be, nothing bad's going to happen. If you do all the right things, like, you're not going to experience suffering. Like, I think I actually believed that for a while. And then my life just started unraveling and I had to figure out and come to terms with, like, wait, like, I know that, like, God loves me, but why do I feel abandoned when things get really hard? Why does suffering feel like abandonment or whatever? And so I start reading through story after story after story and finding, wait a second, every person, every person that God has called or has given like a directive to, or anybody that is following God, including, I don't know, the Savior, Jesus, like, every single person experiences suffering. So no one is exempt, not me, not you, Christian or not Christian, like, no one is exempt from suffering. The thing about it is, like, what do we do with our suffering? What do we believe about God in our suffering? Do we believe he is near to us like he promises? Do we believe that he will be our help like he promises? Or not? Do we believe, nope, this is the time he's forgotten? And so this story in 1 Kings 17, it keeps me so encouraged, right? Because it's like, Elijah was a man of God. He was given a directive. He did the thing and the brook still dried up. You may have taken a job that you believed was like the next right thing for you, and a couple years later, that brook may dry up. And you might be thinking, what now? Like, I don't understand. I thought this is where God led me. I felt that way about Mexico. Wait, I thought this is where we were supposed to go. Why did this brook dry up? And I think we could get stuck on that for a long time. But we could also reframe how we look at it. Well, maybe the brook dried up because there's another assignment ahead of you. Maybe the brook dried up because you've outgrown that. So back in, when I moved in with my parents, and I thought I'd live with my parents for 2 months till I got my feet on the ground, but I ended up living with them for over 2 years, and I really am, like, super grateful to my parents for housing me. I don't think that was easy to, like, have a front row seat to their daughter's grieving process, which just isn't pretty, and also trying to single parent and also trying to date probably way sooner than I should have. And, like, all of that, right? Like, that's not easy. And having people in your house when you didn't have anybody in your house for a very long time. Anyway, but all throughout the process, I just kept saying, I don't know how I'm ever going to move out of here. Like, I don't know how I'm going to move out. I don't have enough money. How am I going to find a place? Like, I can't really live. I'm so scared to live on my own. Like, I've never lived on my own as an adult. I've always either had a roommate or I had a husband, and now I have my parents, and the thought of, like, just me and the kids on my own, it did freak me out. Maybe that sounds crazy, but it did freak me out. And I remember telling my friend, like, all the time, man, I can't even imagine there's a house out there for me. And I'm just like, I just don't think it exists. What I need or want doesn't exist. And the crazy thing is, the house that me and the girls moved into, it actually didn't exist while I was lamenting about it not existing. It actually didn't exist. Like, it was being built. It was being turned into the unit that we would then rent. And it couldn't have been more perfect. And so we get this house. We're next to grandma and grandpa, who are not my actual grandma and grandpa, but that's how they were introduced to me. And now they are forever grandma and grandpa. And I got to live there for 5 years next to them. And I had the best landlords I could have ever had, who were so kind to me. And I'm certain could have probably gotten a lot more money for that apartment or whatever. But they were kind to me. Everybody was so kind to me. And I didn't have to live by myself. And I also had, just dreamed about, like, man, if I could just have a house one day that had, like, a lilac bush. I mean, I love lilacs. They mean so much to me. And I just felt like, I don't know, if I could just have a lilac bush. And so I go take a tour of this house before it's mine. And there's a bush that certainly looks like a lilac bush. And I ask, I'm like, is that a lilac bush? They're like, yeah. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And I really wanted a house with a fireplace. And so we go inside, and there's a fireplace in the living room. I'm like, yo, you've got to be kidding me. And I really wanted a place where we weren't like above or below someone, because I didn't like, I have kids and I didn't want it to be like a stressor to like be either stomping on top of people or being loud underneath people. And anyway, the way this house was set up was like we were side by side and had this full basement. And anyway, and I got the bonus of grandma and grandpa. And it just like couldn't have been more perfect, right? So I get this like perfect place for us, and it is like, I mean, it's literally just perfect for us. And then I'm there for 5 years, and I meet my husband. And he has 3 kids also. So while this house that me and the girls had was really perfect for the 4 of us, it was no longer perfect for the 8 of us. And this is a thing of like, yo, that house was a gift. I mean, that truly was like, in my mind, a gift from God to us. It was more than we could have ever really imagined. It was perfect in every way for us. And then it comes a time where now we're walking into this new answered prayer, right? I wanted to get married. I prayed for a husband like Gio. And we're walking into this new thing. But guess what? That means I have to say goodbye to this thing that I loved so much and these people that I loved so much. In order to walk into the new thing that was an answer to other prayers that I had and felt like a real blessing in my life, I had to say goodbye to something. And I think this happens so many times, right? Like, and we might not really think about it, but in order to walk through something new or maybe to go into a new season, you do have to close the door on an old season. And so we were looking for a house again, and I'm like, now, man, how do I find a house for 8 people? Like, and this was in 2022, so it's like, or 2021, I don't know, when the market was wild. I mean, I guess it still is wild. And I just had to keep remembering back to how I found my first place, like, and how all of the things lined up for me to have a place that was perfectly meant for me and my girls and was more than we could have asked for. And while we're in the house search and we keep putting in offers and getting denied, putting in offers, and like, oh, 17 other offers came in. And by the way, they're paying in cash and, you know, whatever it is. We even had our kids write a letter to the sellers to just be like, hey, like, we have a family that we would, you know, love to put under a roof. And it just was rejection after rejection after rejection, and even like what I would call a fixer-upper. And we're not fixer-upper people. Even those were like way out of our price range. And so it just started getting discouraging, right? I'm like, I do not know how we're going to find a house. But like literally 8 of us cannot fit in this apartment that I'm in, you know, where I was living with my girls. And I didn't really have a solid plan B. So when we talk about Tarry on and this idea of like waiting, a delay, but waiting with anticipation, right? Expectation. So I'm like, okay, how do we handle transitions and how do we handle closed doors? Well, one is we have to remember that we've probably done this before somewhere. Like, are we remembering how God came through before? And that is really what helped me the second time around, because I was like, no. He came through. I know it. And I know this about God to be true about him, like his character, that he does come through. I know this because it's what I read in the Bible. And the reason I read scripture, the reason we need to read scripture if we're Christians is to remind our souls of the truth of who God is, because our circumstances will make us think otherwise, honestly. And so it was really important for me to remind myself of the truth. And it reminds me of a story, of like a real story, when I was taking a walk at the park and I accidentally locked my keys in the car. And I was on my way to pick up my girls from their dad's house. So I didn't have a lot of time, but I thought, oh, I'm going to do self-care. I'm going to go walk at the park. And I go and I locked my keys in the car. And then my phone has like 3% battery. So I make a couple phone calls. I call my mom. I don't know what to do. She doesn't have an extra key. And then I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to call my friend Jimmy. I'm going to call him because he works with the fire company, and he'll probably get me into my car. I just know he'll fix it. So I call him, I tell him where I'm at. I'm at this park. I say it. I call my mom back and I'm like, hey, Jimmy's coming. He's going to get this Big Bertha thing. I forget what it's called. It has a hilarious name, but like you pump air in it and it makes your window open enough to get in and unlock. I don't know, whatever. If you're listening to this and you know what I'm talking about and I sound stupid, I mean, feel free to let me know what it's called. The Big Johnny? No, I don't know what it's called. Anyway, he had a tool, but he told me, he's like, I got to go to this other firehouse and go get it because we don't have it at ours, but I'll be there. And I was like, okay. So I finished the phone call with my mom, and just as I finish, my phone's dead. So now my phone's dead. I don't have keys. I'm in a park. The sun's going down. And I obviously am panicking for nothing. Like, I'm just obviously panicking. That's my go-to. So I finish my walk, and then I just stand by the van waiting for Jimmy to come with like a lot of anxiety. With every centimeter the sun goes down. And it's, 30 minutes. Then it's 35 minutes. Now we're hitting 40 minutes. And all of a sudden I'm starting to wonder, is he coming? Did I tell him the right park I was at? Did he hear me? Did he get distracted? Did he do something? And I kept going back to, no, I know him. I know he's coming. And if he can't come, I know he'd have somebody else come. I know that about him. And why did I know that about him? Because I worked with him long enough to see his character. I knew his character. I knew he was coming. And he rolls in, maybe 45, 50 minutes. It's dark at this point. And I'm like very emotional about it because I was thinking the whole time I had this like sliver of hope. Like, well, I more so had a lot of hope, but this sliver of maybe some fear of like, what if he forgot me? What if he actually forgot? Like, what am I going to do? I mean, there were things I could do. There were houses nearby that I could have walked to and things like that. But I think in the moment, I was just like really nervous about even walking to someone's house in the dark and asking for help. And anyway, and when he came, I just realized the reason I could be so confident that help was on the way was because leading up until this moment, his character proved that he was trustworthy and would come through for me. And I go back to stories like that. I go back to the story of my first house, and it's what made me remember and stay the course and stay encouraged, right? Of like waiting with expectation. Like, no, like God came through, the doors open in the right time, even if it felt like it took longer than I would have wanted to, but I can trust that it'll happen again. The brook might dry up, but there's something else. There's the next thing. It wasn't the brook dried up and that was the end of that story. No, the brook dried up and then there was the next thing. The next miracle was coming. And so, we're looking for a house, and guess what? We can't find one. And in the middle of a random conversation, though I do not believe it was random, my sister mentions that one of her neighbors in her neighborhood is moving, and I said, can you just connect me with her? Can we talk? Because we're looking for a house, and I've wanted to live in this neighborhood, since she moved in 10 years ago. Or if it, actually, wow, like almost, yeah, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago. I love her neighborhood. And she gets me connected. We do a walkthrough. They let us come look at it before they put it on the market. We share our story with them just a little bit. And we know that what we're about to offer is probably not going to be the most they could get for their house, but it was literally all we could offer. So I send the text, and then like I literally just was like with the number that we could offer that we felt good about. And then we just waited. And I was like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do if we don't get this house? But why would they say yes? Like they could get so much more money in this market if they just listed their house. And to this day, I don't know why they said yes to us for sure. They said that they really cared about it really meant a lot to hear our story, and they really wanted us to move in. And I hold them in such high regard because talk about people of like integrity and character. I mean, they sold it to us for the number we asked for when I know they probably could have gotten more. And every project that was on his to-do list to like list the house, right? Like we already said we'd take it, but every project, and there were probably 15 of them that he had listed for what he wanted to do the house to get it market ready, he still finished, even though we were already buying it and already agreed to it. Like, I want to be like that, first of all, like the kind of person that goes above and beyond when it doesn't even really matter, but yet it meant so much to us. We moved into a house that was literally perfect for us, but that they had spent the last, 12, 15 years on renovating and making it perfect for them. But then they needed to move out. And I don't know if they know how perfect it was for us, that while they were making it their dream home, it also is ours. And it was an answer to prayer, and they're always going to be a part of that story. And it couldn't have happened in any more of like a miraculous way in my mind. And so I've had enough times, like these are just tip of the iceberg kind of stories. Like I've had enough times where this has happened, right? Where it feels like, I don't know what the answer is going to be because I cannot figure it out in my brain. Like I can't figure out how I'm going to solve this problem. but I've seen God do it. Like I've seen him do it. Like he did it before, and I believe he'll do it again. I do not believe the brook dries up and then that's the end of the story, because that's literally not what we see. I believe that it's through these miracles, it's through these breakthroughs, it's through these open doors that like no one could have orchestrated the perfect timing of it all. Um, I believe those are the things that show people, right? That point other people to just the goodness and faithfulness of God. And I that matters to me so much. It matters to me. And so we keep waiting in expectation, right? So and how we do that is we remember how he came through before. We have a jar of seashells that we write things on. We haven't done it recently, and we need to do it because sometimes we'll open that jar of seashells and we'll write on all these ways that God came through for us and all these miracles, these little miracles we see. And it will just encourage us so much of like, okay, oh my goodness, if we ever think something's not working on our behalf, we're wrong. And I remember stories like my friend Jimmy, where I was like waiting and hoping help was coming. And I could have this confidence because I knew his character. I knew who he was. And so I can confidently say about the Lord, no, help is on the way. Help is coming. And so, right now we're looking at another transition in our life. We're looking at something that could feel really big and maybe scary and stressful. And I think back and I'm like, okay, but before David killed Goliath, he had fought off lions and bears. And like those lions and bears were like the practice round or like the warm up for this really epic moment of defeating a giant. And the reason that David could walk so confidently into that moment was because he was like, hey, but God helped me defeat the lions and the bears. So I actually know he's going to show up for me here too. And I think sometimes some of us show up and go, yeah, he helped me then, but like, is that it? Did I like, did it run out? Is he going to forget about me this time? Um, and I just think the answer is a resounding no. I think he's not forgotten about you. That wasn't the last time. It literally was to increase your faith and your trust that when you come up against the epic battle, that you can go back to those and go, no, 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 he came through for me then. I know he's going to come through for me now. And we can walk confidently into the next season with the reminder of God's faithfulness. And if you can't remember, all those times, I think a couple things. One, ask people in your life to remind you, because other people can see it in your life of how God rescued you or came through for you. Start writing it down. Doesn't have to be seashells in a jar. It could be whatever you want. But start writing down little ways that like prayers that you maybe didn't even pray got answered. I mean, this is a silly one, except I don't really think anything's silly anymore. I don't know. I think I know I'm not an old lady. I don't get to say it because people older than me will tell me I'm in my prime. Bleh. But I am entering my like old-ish lady era, because the other day we were at the mall and I actually like had a desire to go into department stores to go shopping for clothing for me. I'm going to say it. I'm not proud of it, but it's where I'm at. I don't know when it happened. I don't know what came over me, but like J.C. Penney looked really great. You know what I'm saying? And I was like, ooh, look at all those cute clothes. So I am in my old-ish lady era. I actually don't even remember why I started saying that, because I'm telling you, I am oldish because I started a story and now have no recollection of why I started it or where it was going. So for people who want to say I'm in my prime, this is scary because I don't know what I was talking about. But what I was talking about, I think at some point, was keeping a record of God's faithfulness and of, the miracles. That's what I was talking about. It's silly. Like things don't seem as silly to me anymore. And I think that's part of my oldish lady era, is that everything feels like a miracle. And I think you can walk around thinking everything's a miracle or nothing's a miracle. Like you literally get to just decide. And if you want to look around and use logic to debunk why nothing is a miracle or why everything's not a miracle, you can. I mean, I think you're going to be a bummer to be around. I think you might not be that happy. But like if it makes you feel better, go ahead and do it. But for me, it's like I start looking at everything as a miracle and everything as something to say thank you for. And so a couple weeks ago, we were talking with somebody and they were mentioning how like people offer them, he owns a business, and how people are offering him Phillies tickets all the time. And when we left, all I said to Gio was like, man, it'd be awesome if people were just offering us Phillies tickets all the time, or even just like one time. And I'm not joking, but like the next week, Gio went and recorded a podcast in Philly at a school, and they were like, hey, thanks for recording the podcast. We have 2 free Phillies tickets for you. And I'm like, I'm sorry, what? Like, we literally just said it. And, I don't know that like, because I said it, it happened. But to me, I feel like, wow, like that's crazy. That's a miracle. That's a mini miracle. That's a whatever you want to call it. I'm grateful and I'm saying thank you. And so I feel like take notice of stuff like that. Like take notice of all these little things, and have people remind you of that. And if you're a Christian, like figure out who God is. Like figure out his character so that your narrative is true when times get hard. Like, yeah, you might feel abandoned, but you're not abandoned because he promises to never do that, right? It might feel really scary, but the promise is he rescues you every time. Like it's really important to know his character so that you can have the narratives that are helpful go through your brain. And so anyway, all that to say, I'm going to wrap this up here with this. Transitions are really scary. Change is really scary because especially if we believe that we've already lived out our prime, that our best years are behind us, that maybe we've run out of miracles. Like if that's anything we ever think, then transitions for sure are scary. And for those of us that like really wonder, like, man, am I going to be abandoned this time? Am I going to be alone this time? Like transitions can be even scarier. I think the idea of tearing on is this, like we can wait with expectation because God is actually good. He is full of goodness. And so in the waiting, in the scary unknown, we can tarry on, we can wait with anticipation because we can go back over the catalog of our life and we can start recounting time and time and time and time again where things worked out on our behalf that we could have never orchestrated ourselves. And I don't want to miss those, right? That is the foundation of how we continue to tarry on. So when the bigger, scarier next thing comes, we have the confidence behind us to say, when I slayed the lions and the bears, God was with me then. So I'm going to face this giant in front of me, and God is with me now. And I know it, and I can say it confidently. Friends, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I hope you have an amazing day, and don't forget to tarry on.